Raymond and Marla Kessler had been inseparable for 40 years, their love story seemingly unshakable, until the morning the FBI stormed their home and shattered everything he thought he knew. As agents led his wife away in handcuffs, Raymond stood frozen, his world unraveling. They called her a fugitive, a criminal who had spent decades running from justice. But how could that be? The woman he had built a life with, the mother of his children, was now accused of a crime so dark it felt impossible. And then came the final blow. Marla Kessler was a lie. The woman he had loved for a lifetime had never existed at all. Raymond Kessler had never questioned his life with Marla. For 40 years, they had built something solid, something real. They met in 1983 at a small bookstore in Portland, Oregon. She was browsing through a stack of mystery novels when he first laid eyes on her. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence mixed with an air of mystery. He introduced himself, and she smiled, her blue eyes locking onto his with a spark of curiosity. From that moment, their lives intertwined, seamlessly. They married 2 years later, bought a modest home in a peaceful Oregon suburb, and raised 2 children, Victor and Elaine. Marla had always been the heart of the family. She organized school bake sales, volunteered at shelters, and knew every neighbor by name. People adored her. She was the woman who never forgot a birthday, who always had an extra plate of food ready in case someone needed it. Raymond was a retired history professor, spending his days reading, gardening, and enjoying the quiet predictability of their life together. Their children had moved out years ago, starting families of their own, but they visited often. To anyone on the outside, the Kesslers were the epitome of a stable, loving couple, partners in every sense of the word. But all of that changed on a cold morning in January 2023. Raymond had woken up early, as he always did, and made his way to the kitchen. He brewed coffee, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. Marla was still upstairs, sleeping peacefully. He glanced out the window, expecting to see the empty street stretching before him. Instead, a fleet of black SUVs rolled into his driveway. The sight sent a chill through him. Before he could react, men in dark suits and tactical gear swarmed his front yard. The red and blue lights of their vehicles flashed against the morning frost. His stomach twisted as he realized they were FBI agents. The pounding on the door echoed through the house, sending a jolt through him. His hands shook as he reached for the knob. The moment he opened it, the lead agent stepped forward, his expression cold and professional. Behind him, armed officers stood in formation, their eyes scanning the house as if expecting danger. "Raymond Kessler?" the agent asked, his voice firm. Raymond barely had time to nod before another agent pushed past him. Heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor as the officers moved swiftly, their purpose clear. A sharp scream rang out from upstairs. It was Marla. He turned just in time to see her being dragged down the stairs, her hands pulled behind her back in cuffs. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't even speaking. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on Raymond's, filled with something he couldn't understand. "Marla!" he shouted, stepping toward her, but an agent blocked his path, holding up a firm hand. "Sir, stay back." His heart pounded in his chest. None of this made sense. The woman standing before him, his wife, his partner, his best friend, looked like a stranger. Her silence was deafening. She wasn't asking why this was happening. She wasn't pleading her innocence. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. The lead agent turned to him, his words cutting through the chaos. "Mr. Kessler, your wife is under arrest for crimes committed decades ago. We need you to step aside." Raymond's breath caught in his throat. Crimes. Decades ago. The words didn't fit. They didn't belong to the woman he knew. This had to be some kind of mistake. Marla finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Raymond, I'm so sorry." The apology hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't confused or frightened. She was sorry. As the agents led her out of the house, Raymond stood frozen in the doorway, watching his entire life unravel in a matter of minutes. The woman he had loved for 40 years, the mother of his children, had been living a lie, and he had never seen it coming. Raymond sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where Marla had stood just hours before. The house felt different now, hollow and unfamiliar. The warmth that had once filled every corner had been replaced by a cold, suffocating silence. He tried to process what had just happened, but his mind refused to make sense of it. His wife, his Marla, was gone, taken away in handcuffs by the FBI. And worse, they claimed she had committed crimes decades ago. None of it seemed real. The hours dragged on, each second heavier than the last. Eventually, he forced himself to move, pacing through the house as if searching for answers hidden in the walls. His hands trembled as he picked up a framed photo of their wedding day. Marla had been radiant in her simple white dress, her dark hair pinned back with delicate pearls. He had never seen anyone more beautiful. That woman had been real. She had been his wife, his partner. And yet, the people who stormed his home this morning made it sound as if she had never existed at all. When the shock subsided just enough for him to think clearly, he realized there was only one thing he could do: find the truth for himself. He went upstairs to their bedroom, his heart pounding as he pulled open drawers, scanned the closet, and rummaged through the personal items she had collected over the years. But the more he searched, the more uneasy he became. There were no childhood photos of Marla, not a single picture of her as a little girl, no family portraits, no high school yearbooks. It was as if her life had only begun when they met. How had he never noticed that before? He had always assumed she simply didn't have many keepsakes from her past. She rarely spoke about her childhood, only offering vague mentions of growing up in Minnesota, being an only child, and losing her parents young. But now, those memories felt paper-thin, like they had been carefully constructed rather than lived. He found her old identification cards, but something felt off. Her driver's license from the early years of their marriage looked legitimate, but her social security card seemed strangely new for someone born in the 1950s. He flipped through old documents, looking for anything that might prove her past was real. Instead, he found inconsistencies, dates that didn't line up, missing records where there should have been proof of her existence. A terrible thought crept into his mind. What if Marla Kessler had never existed at all? The doorbell rang, jolting him from his spiraling thoughts. He rushed to the door, half expecting to see Marla standing there, telling him it was all some massive misunderstanding. Instead, it was the same FBI agent from earlier, his face grim. "Mr. Kessler, we need to talk." Raymond let him in, his stomach twisting into knots. The agent sat across from him, flipping open a folder filled with documents. "I know this is difficult, but we need to confirm some information about your wife." He slid a black and white photograph across the table. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. The woman in the photo looked like Marla. Her features were unmistakable, but the picture was old, clearly taken decades ago, and at the bottom of the photograph, in faded ink, was a name he had never seen before. Isabelle Corwin. "Who is this?" Raymond asked, though he already knew the answer. "This is your wife," the agent said. "At least, this is who she was before. She became Marla Kessler." Raymond felt the world shift beneath him. He had spent 40 years married to a woman he didn't really know. Raymond sat in stunned silence, his mind struggling to grasp the weight of the agent's words. The woman he had lived with, loved and trusted for 40 years was not Marla Kessler. She was someone else entirely. Isabelle Corwin. A name he had never heard before, but one that had apparently belonged to the woman he had built a life with. His hands shook as he picked up the faded photograph. It was her, undeniably. The same sharp blue eyes, the same delicate nose, the same small dimple on her left cheek. But the expression on her face was different. In this old photo, she looked younger, harder, as if she had lived through things he couldn't begin to imagine. The agent's voice was calm, but firm as he continued. Isabelle Corwin was involved with a radical extremist group in the late 1970s. They were responsible for multiple armed robberies across the Midwest, including a bank heist in 1979 that ended in murder. A security guard was shot and killed during the escape. Though Isabelle didn't pull the trigger, she was there. She was complicit, and she disappeared before law enforcement could arrest her. Raymond's breath came in shallow gasps. None of this made sense. Marla, Isabelle, had been the most gentle and loving woman he had ever known. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't capable of something like this. And yet, as the agent continued laying out the details, it became clear that she had spent decades hiding from the past, building a new life, erasing the person she had once been. According to the FBI, after the murder, Isabelle Corwin had gone underground. While some members of the extremist group were caught, she vanished without a trace. Law enforcement believed she had either fled the country or assumed a new identity, but the case eventually went cold. Years passed, and no one came forward with any credible leads. Her name faded from the headlines, and the world forgot about her. But she hadn't stopped existing. She had simply become someone else. The pieces started falling into place in Raymond's mind. The lack of childhood photos, the vague details about her past, the way she always seemed uneasy when conversations turned to personal history. She had woven a perfect lie, one so intricate and well-crafted that even he, the man who had shared a bed with her for 40 years, had never suspected a thing. The agent continued, his voice measured. We never stopped looking for her. But technology, back then, had limitations. Recently, a new facial recognition system helped us match an old driver's license photo of Isabelle Corwin to a recent picture of Marla Kessler. Once the system flagged her, we began a deeper investigation. That's when we realized she had been living under a false identity all these years. Raymond felt sick. He had spent decades loving a woman who had lied to him about everything. His mind flashed back to their wedding day, the birth of their children, the quiet evenings they spent sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Had any of it been real, or had she simply been playing a role, keeping up the act to avoid getting caught? And yet, the idea of her being a violent criminal didn't fit the woman he knew. Marla had spent her life helping others, volunteering at shelters, fundraising for charities, always putting others before herself. Could a person like that also be capable of something as dark as murder? Or had she truly changed? Raymond's thoughts raced as the agent handed him another document. She's being processed now. She'll be facing multiple charges, including felony murder. Given how long she's evaded capture, prosecutors won't take this lightly. Raymond felt as though he had been punched in the gut. The woman he had loved, the woman he had shared his life with, was gone. In her place was a stranger he had never really known. The days after Marla's arrest passed in a blur. Raymond barely ate, barely slept. His house, once filled with warmth and love, felt like an empty shell. Every object he looked at, a coffee cup, a framed picture, the neatly folded blanket on the couch, reminded him of her. But now, each memory was tainted by the knowledge that his wife, the woman he had spent his entire life with, had been a fugitive. The FBI continued their investigation, digging into every piece of Isabelle Corwin's past. They brought Raymond more documents, old newspaper clippings, crime scene photos. The images were grainy, black and white, but the headlines were chilling. Armed group robs Midwest bank, security guard killed in crossfire, radical group member Isabelle Corwin, still missing, believed to have fled the country. The stories painted a picture of a dangerous young woman, part of a violent movement that had terrorized small towns in the late 1970s. But that wasn't the woman he knew. Marla had been soft-spoken, patient, kind. She had dedicated her life to helping others. Could someone like that really be the same person who had once held a gun in her hands, who had stood in a bank while a man bled to death? On the cold floor? The lead agent returned one evening with more details. We've been tracking Isabelle Corwin for 44 years. After the bank robbery in 1979, she disappeared completely. It was like she never existed. She left behind no traces, no bank accounts, no identification, no phone records. That kind of disappearance takes planning. She knew exactly what she was doing. Raymond listened, numb, as the agent continued. She likely changed her identity multiple times before settling into her life as Marla Kessler. Her records only start appearing in the mid-1980s, right around the time she met you. It was a clean break from her past. If we hadn't used facial recognition software, she might never have been caught. The idea that Marla had chosen him as part of her cover made his stomach twist. Had their entire life together been a lie? Had she ever truly loved him? Or had he just been a convenient shield, someone with no connection to her past, who wouldn't dig too deeply? His children, Victor and Elaine, were struggling just as much. When he finally called them, their reactions were a mix of disbelief and devastation. They had always looked up to their mother, admired her for her kindness and wisdom. Now they were being told she was a criminal, a murderer. They refused to believe it at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. They had grown up believing their mother was one person, only to find out she was someone entirely different. As the case against Marla, Isabelle, moved forward, the prosecution built a damning argument. Though she hadn't pulled the trigger that killed the security guard, she had been present during the crime. She had aided and abetted the group, helped plan the robbery, and then fled justice for more than 4 decades. That made her just as guilty in the eyes of the law. Reporters swarmed their quiet neighborhood. News vans parked outside, eager to capture footage of the home where the fugitive had lived in secret for all these years. Raymond stopped answering his phone, stopped going outside. He couldn't bear to see the headlines. Beloved community member, exposed as fugitive criminal. He kept replaying the last time he had seen Marla, the way she had looked at him, the way she had whispered, "Raymond, I'm so sorry." He wanted to believe she had meant it, that there had been some part of her that had truly loved him, that hadn't been built on deception. But as more details of her past came to light, he realized he might never know the truth. The woman he had loved for 40 years was gone, and perhaps she had never really existed at all. The trial of Isabelle Corwin, the woman the world now knew as Marla Kessler, became national news. Every major network covered the case, dissecting every detail of her past. Journalists dug up old footage of the radical group she had once been a part of, grainy images of young extremists raising their fists in defiance, the faces of her former accomplices, some long dead, some still serving prison sentences, flashed across television screens, accompanied by dramatic retellings of the 1979 bank heist that had ended in murder. Raymond watched it all unfold from the confines of his home, unable to reconcile the woman on the screen with the woman he had loved. The world saw Isabelle Corwin as a criminal who had escaped justice for more than 40 years. He saw his wife, the woman who had held his hand through life's hardships, who had raised their children with love and patience, who had spent her life helping others. How could those two people be the same? He didn't attend the trial. He couldn't. Instead, he sat in the quiet of their house, surrounded by memories that felt false now. He thought of the life they had built together, every holiday, every anniversary, every quiet moment shared over coffee in the morning. Were those moments real, or had they been part of her carefully constructed lie? Had she ever truly loved him, or had he simply been a convenient part of her disguise? The prosecution painted her as a remorseless fugitive, a woman who had spent decades living freely while the family of the murdered security guard had suffered. They brought in witnesses, former law enforcement officers, old acquaintances who remembered Isabelle Corwin from before she vanished. Each testimony chipped away at the version of Marla he had known. But the defense argued that people could change, that Isabelle Corwin had disappeared, but in her place, Marla Kessler had been born, a woman who had spent 4 decades living an honest, law-abiding life. They called in character witnesses, neighbors, friends, even former students from the adult literacy program where she had volunteered. They spoke of her kindness, her generosity, her unwavering commitment to others. They begged the court to consider the life she had lived, not just the one she had run from. Raymond received a letter from her during the trial. He stared at the envelope for days before finally opening it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Neat, careful, familiar. My love, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. I have spent 40 years waiting for this day, knowing it would come. Every morning, I woke up wondering if it would be the day the past caught up to me. And now it has. What I did in 1979 was wrong. I was young, reckless, and full of anger I didn't understand. I never wanted anyone to die that day, but I ran instead of facing the consequences. I built a new life because I was afraid. But I never lied about how much I loved you, how much I loved our family. That was the only real thing I ever had. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you, for the life I stole from you. You deserved better than a wife with secrets. You deserved the truth. I hope one day you will remember me not as the girl who ran, but as the woman who loved you with everything she had. Marla, or whoever you choose to remember me as. Tears blurred the words as he finished reading. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. It didn't change what she had done. It didn't erase the betrayal. But for the first time since that awful morning, he allowed himself to grieve. Not just for the wife he had lost, but for the woman she had once been. Marla, or Isabelle, was sentenced to life in prison. The justice system had finally caught up to her. But in Raymond's mind, she had already been serving a sentence of her own for decades, trapped in a life of constant fear and secrecy. He never visited her in prison. He couldn't bring himself to. But he kept the letter, tucked away in a drawer, a reminder that despite everything, despite all the lies and deception, some part of what they had was real. Or at least, he hoped it had been.